How do we as individuals choose why we fight? An abstract question leading back to days of old, where the simplicity of land or food could justify horrific acts of violence and bloodshed committed by regular people on regular people, where choices made situated survival and comfort over suffering and starvation would in turn lead instead to an illusion of choice for those involved. They never really could choose because to them it is about perseverance. Against all odds, they must survive, since they are the ones consciously in control of their existence. A flaw in the human condition where we as individuals believe that we will be the ones to thrive, despite history showing us that our existence is merely an anomaly of random chance. We as a species have found a near impossibility to empathize fully with the suffering of another when we ourselves are suffering. The fights of today have become much more complex, where decisions made in the past can more easily be interpreted as black and white. The choices of today have much more nuance and often lead to much more socially questionable outcomes, often case war. War has always been a crux of sustainable development amongst neighboring groups throughout history, in the past being used as an answer to territorial disputes or an excuse to pursue egoistic triumph over a long-term political enemy. War in the post-industrial era has always overshadowed the true intentions behind adversarial conflict. This influx of complexity surrounding the meaning of conflict through the advancement of warfare both through weaponry and media often leads to mass radicalization of the nations, particularly those of young men, on a global scale. Winston Churchill wrote in his 1949 memoir, "It is only in this century that this hateful conception of inducing nations to surrender by terrorizing the helpless civil population and by massacring the women and children has gained acceptance and countenance amongst men." His view on the German propaganda machine from around 90 years ago, in a different century, in the lead up to and throughout the Second World War, notes a barbaric and cruel mission at the core of an already brutal warscape. This accompaniment only requires a small leap to leave a bitter and malformed taste in the mouth of the modern political reader. The tale of German propaganda and the evil of Second World War Germany is by all means an oversaturated market when it comes to media portrayal. There is no stone left unturned. The villains are clear, and history has been settled over why the greatest and most terrible war in human history was fought, which is why a refreshing, modern look at the calmer, more mundane aspects of one of the war's most terrible chapters came as both a shock and an eye-opener. The Zone of Interest, a historical adaptation loosely based on Martin Amos's book of the same name, is at first an odd movie. We are introduced to a well-to-do family living life in the Polish countryside. As a precursor to seeing the movie, we as the audience already have some background about who and what we are watching, both historically and through the production's marketing. This, in turn, leaves us in a position of potential misunderstanding, as the film itself does not immediately try to pit the viewer against the man on screen, despite who he is, instead choosing to draw us in through our morbid curiosity into the inner workings of his life and mind. The film appears, on its surface, to be a summary of the achievements and daily struggles of one Rudolf Höss, one of the most vile men in all of history. Surface level, however, is far from what Jonathan Glazer aimed to portray with this bleak look into the idealistic lifestyle of one of Germany's head SS commandants. The film portrays the commandant as just a man at the head of his family. He makes choices for the betterment of his wife and children, and acts always in their best interest. The side with which we are historically familiar is pushed aside, showing itself only in glimpses or otherwise being physically locked away from us by the walls surrounding Auschwitz itself. We as an audience are almost exclusively locked into his home, or more specifically, his private life as a citizen. This choice as a filmmaker was obviously intentional, as many different pieces of media have covered the story of Auschwitz and the other concentration camps in great length. The horror of what occurred inside need not be repeated without necessity, and its enclosed and unseen appearance in the movie leaves a far more horrific sense of dread on the viewer, as the sounds of the factory like hell on earth constantly bombard us as we watch the lavish lifestyle of Hedvig and her children. Through his decision, the choice of what to show the audience, what fights the director shows as important to have in the forefront are key in giving us an opportunity to interpret them given outside factors. Where the 1924 German expressionist film Das Waxfigurenkabinett portrays, through its dreamlike sequences, a feeling of deep mistrust and disgust towards various historical political figures, the most outstanding being its depiction of Ivan the Terrible, where his abuse of power leads to a sense of paranoia, as he no longer feels he can trust the people he was supposed to serve. And we see this through the actions of those people. He feels the threat of revolution and is unwilling to change his ways, leading to his downfall in the film. This abuse of power, directly mirrored in the German political situation at the time through the financial crash and the government's abuse of power and mismanagement of funds, left the people of Germany poor, starving, and outraged. The threat of revolution was at an all-time high, with proof from Russia that revolution was indeed possible. I feel that we see a similar representation of a Western land plagued in an economy of mistrust and extremism through the medium of the zone of interest, highlighting the importance of understanding which fights are ours to take and why we sometimes must take them. German expressionist films were often used as outlets for deep-seated public sentiment and made for great escapist media for suffering people. The themes of this film movement have carried forward, and I think through great design, the zone of interest has adapted on some of these core tenets to amplify what we as an audience can experience from it. The dream-like fairy tale sequences of the Polish girl leaving food and supplies in the middle of the night for prisoners, while Huss reads the story of Hansel and Gretel to his children, and through voiceover directly to us as well, is portrayed well through the camera, with distorted framing and blended color palettes to contrast the feel of what is being conveyed to us. Where scenes with the Huss family are filmed in a way which we conceive as normal, almost mundane and with a lack of effort, the nighttime scenes show through action a difficulty in survival, for the prisoners and for the girl, but also in how they are shown to us as an audience. Through the distortion and grit, we see a girl struggling through forest and mud to make a small and nearly insignificant difference in the grand scheme. The way the film portrays her choice to fight against the norm as a challenge through life and death is important in the message that I think is trying to be conveyed. The Commandant, by comparison, is always plagued by his choice of inaction. The film shows us time and time again how his actions, despite being his, are also not choices to be made, but simply things to be done. I think, given the political climate the film was released during, these filmmaking choices are of great importance to understanding why he is portrayed as a character of little action, thriving in the importance of titles placed upon him, but still just a puppet to the theme of the greater good of the German Empire. No matter what he wants, he will still always do what he is told, hurting his family in the process. He is a slave to the system he helped build, because that system was never against him. For him, the easiest option was to obey, and this had always rewarded him. I think during his final scenes, where we see him glaring off into the darkness in an empty building alone, darkness broken by the light of modernity shining through into the remnants of the hell on earth that he helped build, do we see a man suffering from his choices to avoid conflict. His action of inaction to help grow an ideology, which he perhaps always knew couldn't last for 1,000 years, have caused pain and suffering which go against any remaining moral in his body, and he cannot stand it. His last fiber of morality causes him to retch, perhaps expelling itself from a doomed vessel. His beliefs shattered in this moment of reflection, yet he continues onward anyway. A slave to the system he built, a product of a political ideal designed to use him and then throw him aside. But this did not have to be the case, and still doesn't. Despite the look of the world we live in today, there are still those who choose to fight despite adversity. And there is always time for us to change. Where there exists a small spark of hope in even the most vile of men, can a fire be started to burn it all down? The greatest stories tell of triumph over hardship, no matter how entrenched we may feel, or how high the mountain may look. The dawn is always brightest at the summit.